A few years ago, Gallup did some research. They did a survey. They wanted the answer to the question, what is rich? Like, how much money would you have to make? How much would you have to own, to feel like you crossed the line to say, this is enough. I'm rich now. And what was really interesting is the results of the survey and the research that they did really varied depending on where somebody was in their life. So for example, people who made in the ballpark of $30,000 a year said, man, if I was gonna feel rich, I would need to make about $74,000 a year. That was the average answer, $74,000. Now, some of you in the room, you make that much money. You're somewhere in that ballpark, or maybe you make more, and you're sitting there hearing me, and you're thinking, gosh, that doesn't sound all that rich to me. I told you it's a moving target, right? So that's people who make about $30,000 a year, but what about people who make about $50,000 a year? People who fall in that income bracket said, man, I would feel rich if I made about $100,000 a year. 100,000 bucks. And then some of you, again, you might be making that much money and you're saying, shoot, I got a couple kids in private school, I've got a mortgage, I've got some car payments. $100,000 isn't going all that far in today's world. Well, they continued on and they asked some of the highest money earners, people well into 6, even 7 figures, how much would you have to make to feel rich? And the average answer from those people was, if I had $5 million in total assets, I would feel rich, right? Just $5 million, I would feel really rich. Here's what came out of this, okay? Here's what I saw in this survey data. What I saw is it's a moving target, it's a moving line, and the more somebody makes, the answer to that question is, I don't really know what rich is, I don't know how to define that, I just know it's a little more than what I have right now. And maybe you're like me, earlier in your life you said, man, if I could just, when I get to the point, when I see the day where I make this much money, I am gonna be, man, I'm just set. Anybody ever say that? And then what happens? You get there and you cross that line and the line moves, right? And then you're like, man, if I could just make that much money, I would be good, I'd be set. And then you get there and the line moves again. You're like, if I could just, you know what I mean? It's a moving target. But here's what we see. What we see is the answer to the question of what is enough is it's always a little bit more than what I have. It's always a little bit more than what I have. And maybe that's why Jesus spent so much time talking about money and a right perspective of money and possessions and all these kind of things. Maybe that's the reason why. Now, a couple things I want to stop and acknowledge right here. Number one, some of you are thinking, man, did I pick the wrong day to come to church? We're talking about money. Are you kidding me? I promise today's conversation is bigger than money, so hang with me. The second thing I want to acknowledge is this. I'm 100% sure we have some people in the room this morning and we have some people watching online who would say, I haven't taken the step of trusting Jesus yet. I haven't put my faith in him, and so don't talk to me about trusting Jesus with my money because I haven't trusted Jesus with anything. I know that you're here, I know that you're listening, and I just want to say to you this morning, don't tune me out, because what we're going to talk about today, guys, is if I could just show my hand a little bit, is this truth, that the more we put our hope in things of this world, the more we put our hope in the economy, the more we put our hope in politicians who might fix it, the more we put our hope in our checking, our savings account, our investments, our mutual funds, all those kind of things, the more we put our hope in stuff, man, the more stress and the more anxiety and just the more turmoil and the more unease we feel in our lives. But I believe, and you may not believe this yet, and that's okay, but I believe the more we put our hope in Jesus, the more peace and comfort we feel knowing it's about more than how many zeros are in my bank account. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. So with that, if you have a Bible, open up to Luke chapter 12. And what I want to share with you are some words of Jesus that it's going to sound funny because these are strong words, but they're actually words of comfort. And I want you to think about that as I read this. In Luke chapter 12, we'll put it on the screen. If you don't have a Bible or the Bible app on your phone, that's okay. You can read along with me on the screen. But here's what Jesus says in Luke 12 as he's having a conversation with some people one day and the subject of money comes up. Jesus has some things to say. Specifically, he says, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed because life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. In other words, what he's saying is this. He's just really simply, he's trying to communicate this principle that your life and the quality of your life is not measured by the volume of your stuff. The quality of your life is not measured by the volume of your stuff. So Jesus says, be on your guard, be very careful, because culture is going to tell you that if you just had fill in the blank, you'd be happy. Like if I just had this, like I'm not happy, I'm not content, I don't have any peace, but if I just had this, I think I'd be good, right? And it's always a little bit more than what we have. And Jesus says you gotta be so careful of that mindset because the quality of your life does not consist in the abundance of your stuff. And he goes on to tell a story about a powerful, this really wealthy farmer who one year for some reason just has a record crop. It's like whatever happened, this guy, he was doing really, really well this year. So well, in fact, that all the barns that he'd built on his farm couldn't even hold all the crops from that year's harvest. And so he steps back and he's scratching his head and he's like, man, I have a problem. I don't know what to do with this. I have all this stuff that won't even fit in my barns. I could give some away, but I might need that stuff. And then he says, I know what I'll do. I'm going to tear my barns down. I'm going to build some bigger barns. I'll fill them up with all this stuff, and I'm going to retire early. He's like, I'm hanging it up, baby. I'm just going to cruise for the rest of my life, right? This will be easy living because I'm going to be set. I want you to see what God says to this guy. This is in Luke chapter 12. If you have it open, it's verse 20. This is God's response to this farmer. He says, you fool. It's one of the only times in Scripture we see God call somebody a fool, by the way. You fool, this very night. You don't even know it yet, but your life will be demanded from you. You're going to draw your last breath in this world tonight. And then he says, then who's going to get what you've prepared for yourself? This safety net, this cushion, all this stuff that you're hoarding, that you're saving up, that you're keeping for yourself. You don't even know it yet, but your life's going to end tonight. And then what good is all this stuff going to do you? Because you can't take it with you. You're saving it all for yourself. It's become all about you. It's become about your security and your peace of mind and your comfort. But man, it's all over tonight. And Jesus says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. So here's what's fascinating to me about this story, okay? God's not upset with this farmer for being wealthy or successful. He's not, because God blesses us. And in the story, man, you could say the weather must have been really good, or the soil must have been really good, or he must have planted all those seeds at the right time or harvested at the right time. He's probably just really good at what he does, right? But the truth is that God blessed this guy with his success. And he blessed him with his wealth, and he blessed him with his resources. So God's not mad at him for being successful or wealthy, but rather what he says is the problem is not that you're rich. The problem is that you're not rich in all the areas that matter most. Because it's become all about you. It's become about your life and your happiness and your peace. And he says, man, what good is it when your heart stops beating? And so with that in mind, I want to give you some good news and some bad news this morning. Which one do you want first? You want the good news or the bad news first? The bad news? I'm going to give you the good news first because I wrote it that way in my outline. You didn't really have a choice, so I'm sorry I asked, but here's the good news, okay? The good news, guys, is you're rich. I don't know if you knew that, but the good news is you're rich. In fact, turn to somebody sitting by you and just say, I'm rich. Go ahead. Come on, say it like you believe it. I'm rich. Does that feel good? A little awkward, maybe, for some of you. The good news is you're rich, okay? Here's what I mean. You may not feel rich because you have maybe more bills to pay than it feels like you ought to, maybe even more bills to pay than money coming in, so maybe you don't feel all that rich. But when you get some perspective around this, like for example, did you know that 3 billion people in the world live on $2 a day or less? And how many of us spent $5 on coffee on the way to church this morning? And you get some perspective around this and you start to see how rich we are. We're really blessed. Or how about this? Sometimes you can tell how rich you are by what upsets you. For example, like you're trying to watch Netflix on your phone and it won't connect to Wi-Fi, so you have to watch on cellular data, and that's annoying. That's a rich people problem, okay? Or like, you know, your shoes that you ordered on Amazon weren't available for Prime shipping, so they took 3 days to get to your house instead of 1 day, and you're upset about that. That's a rich people problem. You get hungry for dinner tonight and you decide you want to go out to eat. And so you jump in your car. If you own a car, that automatically, by the way, puts you in the 14% of the world's wealthiest people just because you own a car. So you jump in your car and you drive downtown and you drive past a dozen good restaurants to get to your restaurant of choice so you can pay somebody else to make your food and hand it to you and clean up when they're done. They even put a little garnish on your plate and you're upset because it took 15 minutes to get to your table instead of 10 minutes. Man, that's a rich people problem. That's a rich people problem. Sometimes you can tell how wealthy you are by what upsets you. Now, let me stop right here and let me say, I understand that some of you, some people listening, some people here in the room, watching online, some of you have real financial crisis that you're in, and I don't want to diminish your situation. I understand that we have some people who've been laid off from their jobs. We have some people whose positions have been cut, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to make ends meet. I understand that we have some people that have medical bills piling up. I understand that we have people who are, maybe you're going through a divorce and your finances are just a mess right now, or maybe you're a single parent and you're trying to figure out how to put food on the table and you're just fighting to survive, right? You're fighting for your family. I understand. We have some people in really, really hard situations, and I don't want to diminish your situation. But I do want to acknowledge that the majority of us, the majority of the people that I'm talking to right now, we have it very, very good. We're blessed in our culture, and that's the good news is, for the most part, man, most of us, we're rich, even if it doesn't feel like it. So there's the good news. Now, you ready for the bad news? The bad news is you're rich. Here's what I mean. Being rich puts you at a tremendous spiritual disadvantage. It just, man, it puts you in a really hard place for a few reasons. Let me explain. One reason being rich is a serious spiritual disadvantage is because you already have a roof over your head. And you already have food in your cabinets, in your kitchen, and you already have clothes to wear, and maybe you can already buy some of the things you want. Maybe not everything that you want, but you can already buy some of the stuff you want. So, it's a disadvantage because you have never had what I would say can even be a blessing of praying this prayer. You ready? It's praying this prayer. You say, God, would you just give me my daily bread? Would you just give me what I need just for today? Many of us have never prayed that prayer before. And so it's a tremendous disadvantage because you've never had the blessing of seeing God provide in ways that only God can provide. It's also a disadvantage because we're so distracted. We have rich people problems, but we have rich people opportunities. We have rich people options. We can do things that some other people around the world can't do, but you know what that can do is it can quickly add up to the point where we get so overwhelmed, so distracted, so preoccupied with those things that we begin to miss out on the things in our lives that matter most, like raising our kids, like time with family and friends, time with grandkids. You fill in the blank. We start to miss out on those kind of things because we're constantly working, climbing the ladder, trying to get more, trying to keep up, trying to maintain, trying to pay bills, right? Trying to pay back debt. It's a disadvantage in that way. And it's a disadvantage because our wealth and our resources make us a target. Like every moment of every day, the lie that culture tells us is what you don't have is what you need to be happy. And if you just had that thing, then you'd be good. Then you'd be happy. Then it would be enough. Then you'd be satisfied. If you just drove a newer car, if your house was a little bit bigger, if you could just afford that nice designer jacket this winter that you didn't get last winter, if you could get that this winter, man, you'd be happy. You'd look good at the mall, right? Christmas shopping, you'd feel good. The sunglasses, the bigger TV, maybe you want to remodel your kitchen. It's like, if I could just get those cabinets, they look so good on my friend's Instagram post. If I could just get those cabinets in my kitchen, I'd be happy, right? Don't even get me started on vacations. It's like this lie that culture tells us that if you just had that thing that you don't have in your life, then that would be enough. And that's the mentality that's got us into this place. You ready for this? It's got us into a place where 80% of Americans have consumer debt. It's got us into a place where Americans together, all of us, if you put our debt together, it equals 14 trillion with a T dollars. 14 trillion. The average American has $38,000 in debt, excluding mortgages. It's got us in a place where 20% of Americans use at least half their income to pay back debt. It's got us in a place where 13% of Americans, how sad is this? 13% of us expect to be in debt for the rest of our lives. I'm gonna die with debt. It's the number one cause of stress and strain in marriages and families. And we just had a stage full of marriages and families, young kids up here. Let me just tell you guys, money is the number one cause, according to psychologists, of arguments and fights and stress and anxiety in marriage. And it's one of the leading factors that steers people toward divorce, disagreements about money and the stress that comes with it. We are on our way to financial destruction, real trouble, financial ruin. And what's got us into this place? I'll tell you, it's because we live in a culture that worships stuff. We live in a culture that tells us we just need more and more and more. And it's at the point where we're not even just spending money we have anymore, but we're spending money that we don't even have yet. Isn't it crazy these days? You ever think about this? Isn't it crazy how many places you can get a credit card? Like you go to Kohl's, right? And first of all, Kohl's is crazy because you go in there and buy a pair of socks and your receipt says you saved like $380, you know? So they're insane anyway. But you get to the checkout aisle and you walk up to the register and what's the first thing they tell you? Do you want to pay with your Kohl's card today? Oh, you don't have one? Do you want to sign up? It only takes 2 minutes. Or you go to Macy's, right? You want to pay with your Macy's card today? Oh, you don't have one? Do you want to sign up? It only takes 1 minute, right? It's like you expect to go to Dairy Queen and they're like, you want to pay with your Dairy Queen card? You say, if that's how I get my Heath Blizzard, charge it, baby, whatever I got to do, right? Well, that mentality has us in a really bad place. As a society, it's got us in a place where we've way overspent our means. And I found this funny video a pastor friend of mine shared that I want to share with you, kind of illustrates this point a little bit. So watch this video. All right. Can we acknowledge that's a little bit funny, but it also hits a little bit close to home? That's why Jesus had so much to say about money, man. It's not because he just wanted your money. It's because he doesn't want us to live in a place where we're constantly stressed about stuff of this world. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but believe it or not, Jesus talked more about money than heaven and hell combined. He talked more about money than heaven and hell combined. And when you look at scripture, you look at the Old Testament, you look at the New Testament, almost across the board, if the subject of money comes up, it's connected to a warning of some kind. And I just want to say right here, I want you to know, I'm not against stuff. It's okay to own nice stuff. You just have to make sure your nice stuff doesn't own you. Because listen, when you buy something, you go into debt for it, then that debt owns you. It's like a bondage that you're in. And you know what happens is when you're in that bondage, you lose options. You lose choices. And then if there's something you want to do or God calls you to something or you want to give to help somebody or you want to, you need that flexibility, you don't have it anymore because your stuff owns you and you're in this bondage of debt. And I have talked to countless people who said, man, I really want to do this or I really want to give to this or I know somebody who needs some help. I wish I could help them. I just don't have the money. And it's because their bills are stacked up so high. There's just no flexibility. There's no margin. There's no breathing room. When your identity and your contentment and your peace are found in your stuff, man, it's a dangerous place to be because it owns you at an emotional and a heart level. So what do we do with this? Because again, we live in a culture that says your stuff is what matters. So how do we get away from this, okay? Here's what happens if we don't, by the way, just so you understand why this is so important. If we don't break this mindset, then what we do is we start to compare ourselves to other people. And let me tell you something, comparison will either make you feel inferior or superior, but neither one honors God. Let me say that again. Comparison will either make you feel inferior or superior, but neither one honors God. And so we have to break this curse of comparison because what happens is when we look around and we see what the Joneses are doing and we see where the Joneses are going on vacation or we see what the Joneses are driving and we just want to keep up with the Joneses, right? But I got a news flash for you. The Joneses are broke. They don't have any money either. 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And so we're comparing our lives to people that can't even afford the life that they're living. And now let me back up away from the issue of money. And let me just say social media compounds this issue because now what happens is you're carrying the Joneses around on your phone in your back pocket. And you're not just comparing your bank account anymore. You're not just comparing your car. You're comparing every aspect of your life to theirs. And it is a curse. So how do we keep this from becoming an even bigger issue? There's even a deeper level to this. The deeper level is this. It goes beyond this lie that your stuff will make you happy, and it goes to a point where culture starts to tell you that if you don't have fill in the blank, then you don't measure up and you're not good enough. And I know I'm talking to people who can relate, because you don't have to live in America but about 15 minutes before you start to feel that. If I don't have this, if I don't drive this, if I don't have this kind of job, if I don't live in this neighborhood, if I don't, whatever, fill in the blank, then I'm not good enough. I don't measure up. And I want to tell you something. That is not a lie of our culture. And I believe that is a lie straight from the lips of Satan. Because if he could take away your sense of self-worth, if he could take away your sense of self-value, then it's a lot easier for him to convince you that Jesus can't see you as having value or worth either. This is not a financial issue, it's a spiritual one. It's a spiritual issue. And that's why in Matthew 6:19, Jesus gave us this advice. He said, don't store up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy. Don't be like the farmer who just saved up all his stuff as a safety net, right? He said, don't do that. Well, why would he say this? Why is this such a big deal? It's because Jesus understood what many of us forget, and that's this truth, that more money won't fix your problems. More money won't keep your kids off of drugs. More money won't cure somebody who's sick with cancer. More money won't cure your depression or take away your anxiety. More money won't fix your marriage. More money won't solve your problems. And see, what we do is we try to satisfy these eternal longings with temporary stuff. But when you try to satisfy an eternal longing with a temporary thing, it just leads to an empty life. And what we need, church, let me tell you something. What we need is not more temporary stuff. What we need is more eternal stuff. We don't need more money. We need more Jesus. We don't need more money. We need more Jesus, because there is no hope in money. And there is no hope in economy. But what Jesus offers us is hope. And that's what we need. So Jesus continued. He said, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. See, a lot of times I think what some of us do, and I've sure done this in my life, is we'll say things like, we'll say all the right things. Jesus, you ask me for anything, I'll give it to you. Jesus, tell me to go anywhere, I'll go. Jesus, tell me to do anything, I'll do it, right? We say all the right things. But then here's the way that many of us live this out. What we really mean if we would say it is we would say, Jesus, you can ask me for anything, just don't ask me for that. Jesus, you can ask me to do anything, just don't ask me to do the thing I don't want to do. Or Jesus, you can ask me to go anywhere, just don't ask me to go there, because that's not where I want to go. I want to go there. Right? So we say the right things, but then we don't live it out many times. And that's why Jesus offers us this advice to not be consumed with temporary things, to keep our eyes on bigger things, because I'll tell you, I don't want to live under the power of the things of this world. I would much rather live under the blessing of God, who offers me hope and offers me a future and offers me better things than any bank account or investment or retirement fund is going to offer me, any income, anything else, because it's temporary. And there's always this desire for more, but in Jesus we find that he's enough. And that's why I love what Paul said to Timothy. Timothy was this guy, if you know the Apostle Paul. If you don't, he wrote most of the New Testament, the second half of the Bible. Like he went around and planted churches everywhere. Incredible spiritual leader, right? And he had this guy named Timothy that he was mentoring, who was like a son to him. And this is what Paul said to Timothy. As he's talking to him, he's trying to teach him how to be a good leader, how to be a good church leader. And he says, Timothy, here's what I want you to do, okay? I want you to go talk to the rich people. And I just want to remind you, what did we say earlier? The good news is you're rich. Say it again. Say, I'm rich. I want you to think about that, because he's talking to you and he's talking to me. And I don't want you to hear these words I'm about to read and think that's for somebody else. It's for you and it's for me. 1 Timothy chapter 6 says, command those who are rich in this present world, you and me, not to be arrogant. In other words, don't think you're all that because you got some stuff. Nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. And man, don't we know that better today than ever before. But he says instead, put your hope in God, who does what? Who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. In other words, don't feel guilty when you're rich. God blesses you. He loves to bless his children. Don't feel guilty for that, but do feel responsible. God blesses you, and it's not all for you. And Scripture says to the person that much is given, Jesus told us this in a parable, to him who much is given, much more will be required or asked or expected. So there's responsibility that comes with that. And 1 Timothy 6 goes on, and Paul says this. He says, command them, these rich people, you and me, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. And in this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. Why? Listen to this. So they may take hold of the life that is truly life. so they can enjoy the depth and the blessing of the living under the blessing of God. So be generous, be willing to share. How do we do this? I think the key is gratitude. I think the key is stopping and intentionally having time in your life where you stop and you consider all the ways that you're blessed. Whether it's like these parents who were sitting up here and many of you that are just blessed by your kids. Or whether it's you're blessed with a roof over your head. Or you're blessed with food to eat. Or you're blessed with clothes to wear. And you can keep going down that road. But build time into your life to stop and consider the blessings that you have and to express gratitude for those things. Build that time into your life. Let me ask you this way. When's the last time that you prayed and you didn't ask for anything? When's the last time that you prayed and you just said, God, thank you for this and this, and you just go down the list and say thanks for all the blessings in your life? Have you done that recently? If you haven't, let me challenge you to. I am so thankful for my wife. She's sitting right there. I'm so thankful for her. The other night I told her I was going to preach about this, and she said something to me that was really profound. I want to challenge you with this. This is what she said. She said, hey, did you ever think about this? If you woke up tomorrow and all you had left were the things that you've thanked God for, what would you have? That's pretty good, right? She's smarter than me. I should let her write my sermons. What would you have? It takes some time to express gratitude because as you do, your perspective shifts. It's not about me anymore. I see other people. That's humility. And then what I begin to do is I begin to live open-handed and I begin to be more willing to let God say, hey, I want that, or hey, I want you to go there, or hey, I want you to do that. And it's not about me and it's not about what I want to do or where I want to go or what I want to give, but I'm willing to put it in God's hands and say, you own it, I just manage it. It's really your call, God. You do what you want to do. And then you get to experience blessing. If you don't believe me, I dare you to try it. Then you experience blessing. And as this happens, you discover this truth. And I want you to write this down if you're taking notes. If you take one thing home with you today, let it be this. Put it in your phone. I don't care where you put it, but somebody needs to hear this. You ready? Your net worth is not your worth. Your net worth is not your worth. It's not your self-worth. And you need to know that because maybe you've made some mistakes. In fact, I just want to share one of mine with you. Last week, if you were here, Brian did a great job preaching. He challenged you to share one of your financial mistakes with somebody else. I just want to share one of mine with you because I knew this was a bad idea. I'd resisted my entire life. And a couple years ago, I gave in and I dropped some money on a Browns quarterback jersey. And we all know they only last about an hour in Cleveland. And so it was like throwing money out the window, driving down the road home from the store, right? I went and I bought a Baker Mayfield jersey. And Baker, on the off chance you're listening right now, please come home. We miss you, okay? So there's my mistake. But listen, you've made mistakes too. And your mistakes might be little like that, or your mistake may have a lot of zeros connected to it. See, the problem with financial mistakes is that they come with a scorecard. In your marriage, you can say, my marriage is in a great place, we're doing really well, or my marriage is not in a great place, things are really hard, but there's no scorecard. Or in your spiritual life, you can say, yeah, my spiritual, like I'm good with God, we're in a great place, or I'm in a really dry season, it's not good right now, but there's no scorecard. Those things are qualitative, but they're not quantitative. But when it comes to financial mistakes, there's a scorecard because there are decimals and zeros attached to those things. And if they pile up, it's very easy for you to begin to consider that your net worth is your self-worth. And you could beat yourself up over those mistakes. And worse than that, Satan's going to beat you up over those mistakes because he's going to throw them back in your face at every chance he gets. He's going to remind you of your past, and he's going to remind you of your failures, and he's going to remind you, oh, I can't, do you remember how stupid you were when you did that? Can you believe, man, you were an idiot? Like, he's going to say that to you all the time. But Jesus never will. And so you shouldn't either. In fact, the next time Satan reminds you of your past, you just remind him of his future. And let me tell you something. Jesus will not beat you up for your mistakes, financial or otherwise. It's going to happen, man. You live life in this world for 5 minutes, you're going to make a mistake. Sometimes it'll be an innocent mistake. Sometimes it's just sin. Sometimes it's on purpose. Sometimes you do it because it's fun. Let me tell you something. Somebody told me earlier this week, sin's not fun. Hey, if sin isn't fun, you're not doing it right. And so maybe you did it on purpose. Maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was intentional. But you know what? Here's the hope we have in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. It says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he's a new creation. The old is gone and the new has come. And what Jesus sees in you is something brand new. And so you are not your mistakes and you are not defined by your past. If you know Jesus, you get a clean slate. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go into a time of communion. We do this every single week, a time in our services where we stop just to say, Jesus, thanks for loving me enough to pay debts I couldn't pay, to give me a clean start so that I'm not defined by my mistakes and I'm not defined by my reputation and I'm not defined by my past, and my net worth is not my self-worth, and I have a hope and I have a future and I can have peace and I can have comfort and I can have contentment because I understand that my identity is in you. That's what this moment is all about. So whether you're in the room or watching online, if you have those communion elements, I want you to get them ready now because I'm going to pray in a second, and we're going to take a moment just to pause and say thank you for this truth, that when everybody else wrote you off and dismissed you and said you were hopeless, a lost cause, when everybody else said you were worthless, Jesus looked at you and said, no, you're worth it. Father God, thank you so much for that hope. For people who are listening right now who, if it's financial or anything else, who've just made a mess out of things, God, I pray that you would, through your Spirit, that you would give them hope today. God, if there's anybody that just needs to turn to you, to trust you, honestly, sometimes I think we just fight and we fight and we fight because it's like a pride thing, or it's like a stubbornness, or it's like a denial of, I don't need any help. But God, it's an uphill battle. I have found it to be true, and I think there are people listening right now who found it to be true. And so for anybody who's listening today who just needs to lay down their burdens at your feet and say, Jesus, you take control, I pray that you would give them the strength, not the weakness, but the strength to do that today. And God, in you, may they find identity and peace and worth. And I'm so thankful that you saw that in me. I'm thankful that you saw that in us. Jesus, we love you. We're so thankful for the cross and for the empty tomb that gives us hope, that gives us grace. We pause in this moment to express gratitude for that blessing and to say thank you. We pray this in your name. Amen.